Singapore is often given as a sort of excellent example of strategic foresight in governance, and why is that?
Well, part of it, I guess, is we've been doing it for a fairly long time. You know, these things started as experiments in the 1980s and have grown through times where we centralized the function in our Prime Minister's office, and now to a period where the centre still has a strong futures function, but the process has burgeoned across the entire government as well. And I do think that that kind of longevity has allowed us to really establish ourselves as a presence, and a continual presence, right? Not one that is sporadic, not one that is linked to any political party or specific ideology, but one that has transcended the nature of different cycles in Singapore. The other reason that I think people often talk about us, because actually there's a lot of very successful examples of foresight, right? It happens in the United Kingdom, it happens in Dubai, it used to happen in a very strategic way in the United States. I think what differentiates what we do is the fact that these are not just products that are done as standalone reports, but the foresight is actually something that feeds into the decision-making process in a very intentional and deliberate way, right? There's the feeding of foresight into the formulation of strategic priorities, and then later on, foresight also helps us to decide how exactly we do resource allocation during the budgeting process. And I think that kind of tight intertwining of the foresight as well as the broader policy process makes for a fairly unique combination. Singapore's model is not necessarily a universal one, right? It's one that is specific to our context, our history, our culture. So where there are these learning points, I think it's really in the sense of things that can be transferred and tweaked and adjusted to other contexts. But having made that slight qualification, I would say it kind of boils down to 5 things, right? The first is to remember that foresight is all about better decision making today. It is not about making better predictions of tomorrow. It's easy to run away with the idea that we are doing this work so that we predict the future. But actually our job is to understand the nature of our own decision making process and improve that, right? Refine it by kind of adjusting and making sure that our learning style and our mental models are as up to date as possible over time. The second thing that I think is important is that we need to embrace what I call friction and discomfort. Because if we are really in the business of improving decision making by examining assumptions, then sometimes the examining of assumptions can be a very painful process. Right? You're asking people to really grapple with their deeply held beliefs, and that can be a very uncomfortable process. So I think we need to allow for the fact that our decision makers especially have to be given the space to deal with that friction, and that the job of the foresight practitioner is to create a space where that discomfort can be constructively channeled rather than destructively used. The third thing is, I think it's to do with how we communicate foresight. And this really is the idea that we need to not just communicate in a purely analytical way, right? We need to communicate in an immersive way, right? A way that acknowledges the whole person out there and really engages them in terms of their head, their hands, their heart, and the rest of their emotions. And that means sometimes that we have to craft really immersive learning experiences for them. These experiences could be videos, they could be games that you play or simulations that you put them through. And I think these can be a lot more powerful than purely written reports, which will engage the mind, but will not necessarily be persuasive because they don't always look at equally important aspects like emotions and activism. The fourth thing that I guess is really quite important is that you need to harness diverse networks in order to engage with the unearthing of assumptions, right, and updating of mental models. We need to know what those mental models are. And very often I think that means having access to what other people are thinking about, so that we challenge ourselves, so that we update our own beliefs and priors, and so that we refine our thinking by having access to what other people are also pondering. I think this kind of process helps us to diversify the ideas that we have, and it comes from being willing to have conversations and engage with as wide a range of people as possible. And then finally, I think what's really important is that we need to adopt what I like to call a design approach. A design approach in the sense that when you're designing a product or a UX or anything, a service, you're already designing experiences, right? It is the experience of using a computer that makes it a good product. And I think when we do foresight, we need to be thinking about what the experience is of our products. And the more that experience can speak to our decision makers, right, and make them realize that there are new ways to perceive the world, then the more I think we'll be able to be effective. And the more we'll be able to achieve what Pierre Wack, the great founder of scenario planning in Shell, used to call the gentle art of reperceiving.